This afternoon, we're going to explore what I like to refer to as the psychology of stubbornness. Your effectiveness as a leader will be directly related to how well you can influence people to willingly, that's the key word, willingly change, especially when there is resistance involved. And today we're going to explore what it is that actually triggers change resistance, and it's probably not what you think. I want to look at how we can help others, and maybe even yourself, be more open to new ways of thinking. The reason this matters is we tend to assume that if someone is failing to see reason or failing to be rational, the reason is because they don't have enough information. There's a knowledge gap. And so we assume that if we can just present obstinate people with better evidence, solid data, a logical, watertight argument, they'll see the light, they'll change their minds. But of course, that is rarely the case. When someone is deeply attached to a belief or a way of doing things, giving them more information that challenges their view, doesn't cause them to open up. You've seen this. It causes them to double down, to push back, to dig their heels in. Talk show host Dick Cavett put it best when he said, "It is a rare person who wants to hear what they don't want to hear." Now, up on the screen is a number that is significant for a reason you are unlikely to guess. That number is 20,430. This number is how many books of the 4 million published last year had the word change in the title or the subtitle. We all know that we need to change, that change is essential. We spend a lot of time talking about what needs to change, but here's the key truth I'd love you to take away from our time together this afternoon. Nothing changes until people's minds do. You can have the best change strategy in the world. You can have the best change initiatives in the world, but if you can't get people to willingly open their minds to change, you will never get liftoff. Now, the good news is that while opening people's minds is not easy, it is possible. I want to look at 3 research and science-based keys for doing just this. First key is this: we need to aim for affinity. See, the essence of this first principle is simple. People will not listen to you until they like you. You've got to win people over to you before we have any hope of winning them over to your perspective, your argument, your point of view. Now, more than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle wrote about this in his work on rhetoric and persuasion. What he said is that the most powerful tool in influence isn't logic or emotion, what he called logos or pathos. It was ethos. Ethos is all about credibility. It's all about trust. And today, neuroscience backs this up. Professor Paul Zak has spent decades studying the neuroscience of trust. And he's discovered that when people feel connected, when they do things like laugh together, sing together, their brains release a chemical called oxytocin. And this little burst of connection fundamentally changes the way that we perceive each other. We start to feel open. We feel safe, we feel receptive, we let our guard down. And so the next time you're trying to get someone along the journey of change, don't start with your argument or your logic, start with connection. One of the best things you can do, go for a walk together. Paul Zak's researchers show that when you walk side by side with another person and you get in step, in sync with them, oxytocin is released, a bond is formed. That means that person will be far more open. Okay, second key is lessen the loss. It does not take a genius to realize that there is one emotion that is always involved when there is resistance to change. And it's an emotion that begins with the letter F. I'm sure that many of you can guess what that emotion is. It is fear. But here's the thing. Fear shuts down thinking in a way that is very different from what you've been led to believe. Now, I saw this firsthand recently speaking with a client of mine who had just introduced a new back-end system for their sales team. They were rolling it out across their entire retail business. The previous system they'd had, the old system, was a relic from 2 decades ago. It didn't work on smartphones. It was basically DOS-based. It constantly crashed, and it frustrated everyone who used it. So they developed a new platform, And the new platform was a complete reinvention. My client couldn't wait to send it live. She was so excited. Now, when I ran into her later that year, I asked how the rollout had gone, expecting her to share a positive story, but that's not the case at all. She sighed. She said, honestly, this has been probably the hardest rollout of anything that I've ever done in my career. The pushback has been immense. She said, we've had people who've resigned. There's been a petition going around with people signing it, wanting to go back to the old system, the one they all hated. She said, I guess I underestimated how afraid of change our people are. Now, we've been told that for decades, that humans are naturally afraid of change. We just assume that it's part of what it is to be human, but it's not true. You and I are not afraid of change. The fear that causes us to shut down and causes others to shut down, to resist new things, new ideas, is not the fear of change, it's the fear of loss. The moment there's loss involved in change, that's when this resistant instinct tends to get triggered. Typically, there are 3 losses that trigger resistance most frequently. The first of these is a loss of power. When change makes us feel sidelined or less significant. The second is a loss of familiarity. That discomfort we feel by leaving behind what is known, what is predictable, what feels sure. The third is the loss of dignity, that fear of appearing foolish or being seen as out of touch or losing face. Because the key in helping people to embrace change is not to push harder or to try and sell the change, it's to lessen the loss. Don't press harder on the accelerator, release the handbrake in people's minds. Now, that might mean asking for advice rather than giving instructions. It could mean involving people early in the process. They feel they've got some ownership over the process of change. Or it could simply mean giving people a choice, even a small choice, so they feel like they are in the driver's seat of the change. Because if people do not feel they've got choice or agency, they will instinctively resist change rather than engage. Dale Carnegie put it best when he said this. He said, someone convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. See, real influence is not about forcing compliance. It's not about even coaxing through incentives. It's about lessening any sense of loss and creating the conditions where people feel they are able to make the choice, the willing choice to change. Third and final key is this. How do we reframe reality? Now, the essence of this third principle is that you do not change minds by winning arguments. You change them by helping people see things differently. Can I ask everyone to do me a favor? Would you mind holding out in front of you your non-dominant hand, the hand you don't write with, palm facing the ceiling, if you wouldn't mind. So your non-dominant hand, palm facing the ceiling. Okay, now with the index finger on your dominant or handwriting hand, can you write the letter X on your upturned palm? So write the letter X, please, if you wouldn't mind. If you could do that again, please. Write the letter X, but watch how you do it. Where do you start? Top or bottom? Left or right? Which of the axes do you start with? Because the interesting thing is, you may never have thought about this before, there are 8 different ways to write the letter X. And truly, you may have gone through life up until this point, assuming, like I did, that everyone wrote the letter X just the same way you did, but they don't. And that's true of almost everything in life. See, your reality is not the reality. And one of the most powerful ways to open someone's mind is to simply help them to see things from a different perspective. To get them to a point where they say, either to themselves or out loud, you know what, I had never seen it that way before. I'd never thought of it that way before. Now, there are lots of ways that you can reframe reality for people. One of my favorites, and I often teach this to leaders when I'm working with clients, is something called the rate and reflect approach. And it comes from some research done at Yale University over the past few decades. Now, this technique, and it's absolute genius if you can use it well, okay? It centers on asking another person who may be resistant to change 2 specific questions in a specific order. The first question is this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready or willing or interested or open are you to, and then fill in the blanks, whatever the change is you're asking them to consider. Now, if they're feeling particularly resistant or stubborn, they'll give you a low number. And let's say they give you a 2, or maybe even a 3. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself. Now, you may assume the next question then will be to ask them, well, why didn't you give a higher number? But the power of the rate and reflect approach is that actually that second question is the opposite to what you might assume. The second question becomes this: out of curiosity, how come you didn't give a lower number? They said 2 or 3. Why didn't they say something lower than that? Because what this one question does, this second question flips the focus. So now what you're doing is, instead of getting them to think about all the reasons they don't want to do what you're asking them to consider, you're encouraging them to consider the small, maybe the very tiny part of them that sees there may be some merit in the idea or the suggestion that you're putting forward. And see, that's the power. That's the power of reframing. As the author Wayne Dyer once put it, he said, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. That's what reframing is. Now, we've spent the past few minutes talking about how to open up other people's minds. But as we finish, I want to encourage you to be courageous or brave enough to hold a mirror up to yourself. Because the truth is, we all get stuck in our ways from time to time. We tend to cling to certainty. It's hardwired into the way we think, the way our brains work. We cling to certainty, to what is familiar, to what is predictable. The things that make us feel in control, the things that make us feel safe. And yet, can I suggest right now, holding on to what feels safe and predictable is actually the most risky, the most dangerous thing that we can do. In this time of rapid change, it's worth remembering that you cannot find new treasure if you're using an outdated map. We cannot cling to mindsets, to assumptions, to strategies, to playbooks, to ways of doing things that worked in the past and expect them to continue working in the future. As the late futurist Alvin Toffler once wrote, he said, "The illiterate of the future will not be those who can't read and write. It'll be those who cannot, or I would add, will not, learn, unlearn, and relearn." And it's that unlearning piece that matters most. In the years to come, the essential posture will need to be one characterized by humility, by adaptability, but above all else, by curiosity.